Hey, Earthlings, how are you doing? So, have we got a treat for you? I thought I thought I'd lost my guest then for a second there, Andy.
No, it's all right. My phone flipped round the other way for some reason. I think the
All right.
tripod wasn't 100% straight. There you go.
So, people, this is a world premiere of Andy's new, first film, really, and so it's all very exciting. And so we've got a Q&A after this, and then we'll open it out for the chat. But I'm going to ask Andy my first question because to allow people to arrive, as it were, because it'll be good for people to watch all of it and not miss the beginning. So Andy, I was going to say, you recognize this? This is your first claim to fame. This is a really lovely.
It took nearly as long to arrive to you in the post as this film took to make.
Yeah, that's what it did. Yeah,
that's bad.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you because I've been watching these interviews that film critics do with world-renowned filmmakers, and so I know the first question to ask, which is, so, Mr. Filmmaker, what was your motivation? Was it a lot of work, and how do you feel about the end result? And I'm assuming it was more work than this, or am I wrong?
It was absolutely more work than that. Only in the sense of research alone, it was definitely more work than that. But it's been enjoyable work. It's been the thing, like, I suppose it was a subject that once upon a time I thought I knew quite a bit about until I started really looking at it and realized just how little I actually knew. There was lots of things that I hadn't really, triggered or resonated in the way that they now have. But I suppose the motivation and the inspiration came from having constant conversations with people where they felt like I was criticizing them or I was trying to, judge them in some sort of way by just trying to correct language or trying to improve the way that they were spreading the message. So I thought, well, instead of people feeling personally victimized by what I'm saying, how can I spread this to potentially everyone at once by saying, look, here's a suggestion, as opposed to you're getting it wrong. And that's where the sort of inspiration of the film came. But I think a lot of it too was I've done quite a few live streams on TikTok where I'll sort of like play one of these speeches or one of these talks, and you'd be really, really saddened to see how many people would join and see, like, say, Tom Reagan doing the case for animal rights speech or whatever, and nobody would say, who's this? Who's this person? I've never heard of this person before. And it was really tragic that was the case. So I suppose it was all of those things amalgamated into one.
Yeah, it is rather odd, isn't it, that animal rights theory is boycotted within the animal rights movement, which is, I just said, a little bit of a tragedy. Argent provocateur, grumpy vegan granddad. No, you don't have to pay.
Absolutely no, never
on this channel, but you'll have to wait a little bit because we're gonna show the film shortly, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions. Now that I'm trained as a film critic, and then we'll open it up for the chat. So do feel free to put your question in, because I will go back so we don't miss anything. Okay, so don't worry about that part of it. Let's just say a few hellos possibly before we get going. Michael was here a long time ago, so hi Michael. Bianca, hi. Deb, vegan Graham. Sorry, I can't remember what vegan stands for now. Do you know what that vegan stands for, Andy?
Oh, don't put me on the spot. Vegan education.
Yeah.
And
I've forgotten. Yeah,
sorry, I can't remember. Yeah. I'm really sorry, Graham. You're going to kill me. Vegan education. I can't remember what the G is.
Oh, it'll be being written right now, I'm sure. So Canadian vegan forever. The real thing. Hi. Spiritual vegan. Hello there. Paul Hatterley. Hello. Grumpy vegan granddad, as we said. Vegan cannibal. Carolyn Harris, welcome.
That's it. Vegan Education Group and Network.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I remembered it before you typed it. Don't be mad.
We get there in the end. Kev's Vegan Kitchen. Hello there. Wendy. Hi, Wendy. How are you doing? Sophia. Hello. Paloma. Hello. think we've got everybody now. I think. Anybody that we're missing? Joanna, welcome, welcome. Right, I think we've got everyone.
Everyone, by the way.
Powered Mam.
That's Tammy.
So, yes, excellent. Okay, brilliant. Right, so that's the setup then. We're going to show the film now, and then I'm going to ask Andy a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for the chat. So that's the deal. We have to remember, Andy, that when we go on the film, we need to mute ourselves.
Yeah,
So,
I'll do it any second.
Yeah. Okay. So I got a little surprise for you, Andy, in the sense that you haven't seen this yet.
Oh, okay.
A new film by Andy Atkinson, indeed. So,
I thought you were just the interviewee, but apparently you're a filmmaker too now.
Oh,
how long did that take you, and where did the inspiration come from?
I slung that together this morning. You know what I mean. Anyway, okay, people. So enjoy, and we'll see you in about 28 minutes, if I can remember how to do this. Full screen, and here we go. And thanks again for being here, everyone.
At the time of writing this, in March 2023, veganism is the fastest growing social justice movement on the planet. Whilst the numbers are the highest they've ever been at any point since the formation back in 1944, you could also argue that the numbers of those being exploited are also at their highest ever too. There is a growing concern that the original philosophy may be slowly being diluted, if not completely lost, in order to make way for a new one which is far more welfarist in nature, where abolition is replaced with the reduction of suffering and improving the lives of those who will still only exist to be used or taken from. The idea of this short film is to dive back to the roots of the philosophy and hopefully provide some education, re-education, or simply some inspiration as a collective to once again stand for veganism in the way that was always intended. To re-establish that there is no right way to do the wrong thing, there is no kind or better way to exploit, and improving the environment, enrichment, or quality of life does nothing at all to remove the fundamental wrong, and that is the violation of their rights. Whilst the Vegan Society may have been established 79 years ago this winter, the idea and ethics which encompass veganism have obviously been around for much longer. There's plenty of evidence of people choosing to abstain from using animal products, which can be tracked back some 2,000 years ago at least. The Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, for example, was an undisputed vegetarian. He viewed vegetarianism as a key factor in the peaceful coexistence of people and nature. He held the view that slaughtering animals brutalized the human soul. In the same era, or a little bit after, you had Buddha discussing the ideas of peace and promoting a vegetarian diet within his growing number of followers. And vegetarianism has always been a central part of Buddhism, which enshrines compassion to all living creatures. I No Longer Steal from Nature by Al-Mari was written around 1000 AD, which not only abstains from eating or consuming all animal products, it even talks about injustice. Leonardo da Vinci in the 1400s was utterly repulsed by the slaughter of animals and openly refused to partake or be around the eating of flesh. The 17th century philosopher John Locke voiced arguments openly about how animals were intelligent creatures, capable of thoughts and feelings, and even raised moral objections to how animals were used and treated. In 1806, Dr. William Lamb and Percy Shelley were amongst the very first to publicly object to both eggs and dairy on ethical grounds. And by the late 1800s, vegetarian restaurants had even started to become popular in London, with other cities joining the suit by the turn of the century. This brings us back nicely to the foundation of the Vegan Society. which is the oldest recognised vegan organisation in the world and was founded in the United Kingdom by pioneers Donald Watson and Sally, otherwise known as Elsie Shrigley, who called on non-dairy vegetarian allies to organise in 1944.
One interesting part of the history of the vegan social movement is the fact that the people who formed it and in the end ran it had no idea that that was going to happen, that that was going to be their fate. They simply wanted to have a vegan enclave as such within the vegetarian movement. But the vegetarians said no. And that was a good thing in the end. The vegetarians said to the vegans, no, you go and do your own thing. And so that's what happened in 1944.
Donald, his wife Dorothy, Elsie, Faye and her husband George Henderson and others would in November of 44 pave the way for everything that was to come and for what we know today as veganism, including of course the very word vegan, coined from the first 3 and the last 2 letters of the word vegetarian.
Now their first job was to prove that a 100% plant diet was satisfactory, because that was against the medical orthodoxy of the time. In fact, their doctors and their vegetarian friends all believed that they were going to die.
But what were those core ideas that inspired the movement's creation? Were they based on those of rights or welfare? Let's find out together. I wanted to take this moment to reiterate something I don't think that many are aware of, and certainly I hadn't fully realised until I started researching this film. The entire philosophy was born off the back of 2 world wars, one of which was very much still ongoing at the time of the foundation, and the idea of peace and justice and freedom were all inspired by the exact opposite which each of those had witnessed envelop them all. Donald Watson for certain lost some of those closest to him during this time, and it's safe to say that all of the founding members will have been deeply affected by the Great Depression, oppression and hopelessness, not to mention the constant threat of losing their own lives. It took not only strength and courage, but also a deep level of respect and empathy towards others. At a time when it would have been so easy to be selfish, they instead wanted to be selfless, and this all well before the end of the conflict, and especially before the 2 atrocities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The reason that I wanted to make sure this was brought to the attention of everyone is because it completely goes against that modern day consensus that veganism is just a diet, when in the reality is it was always about the direct opposition of violence, the opposition of injustice, the opposition of oppression. It was always a philosophy of peace, justice and freedom for all.
In an interesting history of the movement when it was 70 years old, Dr. Samantha Calvert points out that one of the pioneers, Leslie Cross, in 1949, said that, hang on a second, we don't have a philosophy of veganism. We don't have a very good definition of veganism. The vegan diet was defined, but not veganism. So that's what they set out to do from then on until around about 1954. However, even before that, there were some attempts. For example, this is Donald Watson from 1945. He's the best known of the co-founders of the vegan social movement. And he said that veganism was the opposition of the exploitation of sentient life. Leslie Cross, though, was really the person whose writings established the evolution of vegan philosophy. What he did really was establish what you could call the focus and the scope of veganism. The focus is always on our relationships with other animals, but the focus is only part of veganism. The scope is much wider and concerns environmental issues, and in particular, issues about human evolution. They said that humanity had got into a new low, and veganism was kind of key to get it out. The language could be a bit flowery at times, but the strong underlining message was always that the liberation of other animals was our own liberation, that the benefits to humanity from veganism would be absolutely huge.
And if we can solve this problem of animal exploitation and spread veganism, we should also solve the problems of war and poverty and all the other things that has caused immense suffering to people and animals through the ages.
The movements for human, earth, animal liberation. When we start to put these movements together, we get what I call total liberation. When we think in terms of total liberation rather than single issue, we start thinking in a very different and much more profound way.
In two separate essays in 1951, Cross made it crystal clear that veganism was about animal liberation rather than animal welfare. He was very strong on this point.
If you look at the distinction between use and treatment, the animal welfare position is use is okay if treatment is acceptable. The animal rights position is that use is not acceptable, however humane the treatment may be.
The idea of humane slaughter is like an oxymoron to me. It's like military intelligence, you know. I mean, the two ideas don't go together very well. But even if there was, by some wild invention, some way of killing animals without causing them pain, still wouldn't justify killing them.
The vegan pioneers were liberators rather than reformists, although they did talk about reform as a type of social transformation sometimes. And more than anything else, they were, as they still are, abolitionists. Veganism is animal liberation, and veganism is abolitionist.
Our shared goal is not to reform this great evil, but to abolish it completely. It is not bigger cages that we want, but empty cages. And anything less than total victory will not satisfy us.
Just as in the 19th century, there was a real schism between abolitionists of slavery and the people who wanted to make slavery more humane. Those people were at odds with each other because the abolitionists said, look, I'm not interested in making an unjust institution more humane. I'm interested in abolishing the institution.
Remember, the abolitionists did not ask, beat the slaves 3 times a week instead of 5. They did not ask, give them better bedding and more food. They said, end the slavery altogether.
In a very powerful essay that was written in 1954 called The Surge of Freedom, Leslie Cross spoke about the changes that a vegan revolution would bring.
It seems clear to me that the age of predatory man is coming to an end. He is destroying not only the animals, but the whole planet and himself too. He cannot go on.
Some of those changes are obvious, he said. Obviously, we would stop eating other animals, vivisect on them, we wouldn't hunt and that kind of stuff. And then he said that there were some of the changes which are not so obvious. It's the benefits to humanity which fall into this category. Essentially, a vegan world would be transformative for the benefit of all. Veganism is, after all, a justice for all philosophy.
Is it rational, impartial, scientifically informed? Does it stand for peace and against injustice? To all these questions, the answer is an unqualified yes.
Now here's another articulation of vegan values from the 1960s from Eva Batt, and another one again from the 1980s or the 1990s, depending on which edition of this book is being cited. But overall, Matthew Cole, the sociologist, sums up things very well indeed, and he did this in 2014. He said that the vegan aim or object combines compassionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning, says Cole, was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society. Both, he said, flowed from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human animal relations.
The important idea for the purposes of the animal rights movement is the idea of what philosophers call a negative right. This is a right of non-interference, non-invasion, non-harm. And what the animal rights people are really trying to do, what we're trying to say, is that the arguments are in place, they're there, they're compelling, they're persuasive, that make the case that these rights extend to other animals.
And we will not be satisfied until we've gotten every animal out of every cage.
So there we have it, the exciting and somewhat chaotic, you might say, beginnings of the vegan social movement, and then the evolution of vegan philosophy as we know it now.
It should now be well established when, how, who by, and most importantly, why the movement was founded, and the simple concepts and values which it was based upon. There would have been both encouragement but some level of expectation for us to evolve, certainly not any kind of compromise or worse still regression, and those original values were never intended to be diluted or reduced. The idea of campaigning for better standards and more efficient forms of exploitation in the likes of welfare groups and legislation is essentially not only a complete lack of respect for our foundations, but more importantly for the victims that those foundations were set up to liberate, not continue to use in a nicer environment. Yet worryingly, that seems to be an ever-growing view within the collective. Simply through the use of their language they use or the media they share, this reducitarian paradigm is sweeping in. Which brings us on to the penultimate section of this film. How did we get here?
You started getting this distinction, this debate between animal rights and animal welfare.
I think that people are so concerned about suffering that they tend to lead activism into a welfare position.
The people who were the rights people were by and large vegans. They got it. They understood that if animals have rights, if they have a right not to be treated as our commodities, well, then that logically implies you can't eat them, you can't wear them, you can't use them for various purposes. And so the rights people got that by and large. The welfare people didn't.
But can we please stop reducing veganism to a welfare movement where all we talk about is animal cruelty? We're not campaigning for comfier cages, and every time we talk about just cruelty, that's where people's heads go. They want to try and find a solution for it rather than actually respecting the rights that they're violating.
And a welfare approach, which talks about suffering and cruelty, essentially a kind of don't be cruel message, whereas the rights message is stronger. It's do not violate rights. Makes the claim that other animals are rights bearers and that when we use them, that's a rights violation.
They could say, well, what's the difference? Because, if you're working to reduce suffering, that's going to lead to abolition. Let me tell you, there is no historical evidence, absolutely none, that by regulating animal exploitation, it will lead to the abolition of anything. If anything, the empirical evidence is to the contrary. The more you tidy up these unjust institutions, the more comfortable you make people feel about exploiting animals.
If you look at all the animal groups that still sell books, for example, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Tom Reagan book, and you won't find the case for animal rights. So the fundamental, groundbreaking statement of rights-based animal rights is not part of our movement. Peter Singer's Animal Liberation is, and that's a non-rights book. Singer says quite openly that he's not an animal rightist and that he regrets framing animal liberation in terms of rights.
Although people very frequently describe me as an animal rights advocate, as you just did, and that's fine from the point of view of taking a political stance. People will know what side I'm on, where I am. Philosophically, I'm not an animal rights advocate.
He makes it very clear he doesn't think it's animal use per se that is problematic. What Peter says in Animal Liberation is it's the treatment of animals that's problematic. I think it is terrible that someone who is referred to as the father of the animal rights movement is saying that it's a morally defensible position to eat animals that have been, quote, humanely, end quote, raised or slaughtered. I think that's nonsense.
I'm sure many of you listening to this have yourselves watched, recommended to others, linked or handed out materials which promote films like Dominion and Earthlings, among others, not to mention the sharing of graphic footage and the like on your various social media accounts. Maybe you've even taken part in street activism where you've shown this footage to the public on screen strapped to your chest or at some public event. We are all aware of how moving and effective these films can be for the not yet vegans to watch, to bring that shock and discomfort factor that often invokes a reaction and then a conversation. And usually, most of the time, that reaction is sympathetic, right? Let's be perfectly honest here. Almost everyone, everywhere, is against unnecessary suffering. For the most part, we all share the same values and morals. They're just either misguided or misdirected by many due to outside influences.
We get this oppressive mindset from our parents, our environment, or the media. That discrimination is a learned behavior applies to any form of oppression. Also to speciesism. What is speciesism, you ask? Speciesism is the moral discrimination of individuals based on their species.
Yet at base level, the vast majority would vote for no suffering over some suffering. Of course they would.
Although we supposedly prohibit the infliction on animals of unnecessary suffering, we do not ask whether particular animal uses are necessary, even though most of the suffering that we impose on animals cannot be characterized as necessary in any meaningful sense.
There's something that we use animals for that's important, for example, pain experiments, the pain happens to be important, then that takes precedence. What the scientists or whatever the enterprise is, the Animal Welfare Act is involved with, the enterprise has to come first, and that makes sense.
This brings me back to one of the realizations that inspired this film. All of that footage, all of those films, it only ever takes people to one place: treatment. It makes them see how bad, how tragic, and how deplorable the situation is, without ever addressing the fundamental issue. It highlights the violence, the barbarity, the torture and pain, and nothing at all about how if none of those things happened and we were showing content, well looked after, healthy and well enriched animals instead, absolutely nothing at all would change about the fundamental wrong.
Even if they remain property, we could treat them better, but we don't. And we have had animal welfare laws for 200 years, and we are exploiting more animals in more horrific ways than at any point in human history.
This then extends into the language that we use. Cruelty, suffering, abuse, these take precedent over exploitation, use, or rights violations, simply because they appear more hard-hitting. When the truth is, every single time you use one without backing it up with the why, you only further dilute the cause, albeit unintentionally.
We rush in, we promote some welfare solution that dissipates, reduces the demand for abolition.
Not being cruel is not enough. Being kind is not enough. We are not here to beg for mercy or make a plea for pity. We are here to demand justice for our fellow animals.
So the question is, what do we do now?
Veganism is the single most important thing that one can do today.
As advocates for the other animals, we need to send a strong, clear, abolitionist message.
I say without hesitation that I think accelerating a trend to veganism is the most important thing we can do today. We live at momentous times, at what could be a terrific turning point in evolution.
According to some, vegan education has already been tried and it doesn't work. But this is a totally false premise. Instead, people can never pinpoint a time where education about veganism was ever given a proper chance to begin with, let alone to say it doesn't work. With the term only being around for the last 80 years or so, and in comparison to the 200 plus years of animal welfare legislation and over double that of single issue and pressure campaigns that we know of, it's much more documented and accurate to state that it is in fact those which do not work. And so surely it has to be time for us to look at education.
You know, I mean, imagine if you were somebody who was an abolitionist of slavery and you owned slaves. It doesn't make any sense. If you are in fact an abolitionist, then apply the principle of abolition to your own life. You know, as Gandhi would say, just say no. Don't participate in it.
Veganism is a way of thinking. It's a way of respecting other beings, humans and non-humans alike.
1970, I coined the term speciesism to describe the prejudice against the other species and to draw the analogy with other prejudices like racism and sexism. All species are related biologically and through evolution. And instead of treating the other species like objects, we should be treating them as our evolutionary cousins. So it doesn't matter what species you're from, any more than it matters what race or gender you're from. We should all have the same sort of respect, morally speaking.
People should want to live in a world where respect becomes the keynote.
When we look at slavery in America, when you could buy and sell and beat with impunity people of African descent. Unthinkable today. When women couldn't divorce her own property or get an education or vote. Unthinkable today.
Any revolution that liberates one species on the back of millions of others is no revolution at all. That is not revolutionary change. That's just more of the same. That's just changing the regime, the humanist speciesist regime, and profound change eludes us.
I think it's the question, do humans always have to act like this? Do we always have to be aggressive? Do we always have to be bullies? As long as we're bullies to other animals, we'll be bullies to each other. As long as we're bullies to each other, we'll be bullies to other animals, and there's really no difference between the two.
I think the amount of progress animal rights advocates have made is minuscule in terms of the challenges we face. All we've done is to pour the footer for the foundation of an edifice. Or maybe we haven't even done that. Maybe all we've done is dug the footer, for the foundation of an edifice. But the great work that remains to be done is the work that will really bring about empty cages, true animal liberation.
Education is labor intensive. It is grueling. It is a pain in the neck, but it's the only way we are going to ever succeed. And by we, I mean those people who believe that it's the abolition and not the regulation. Those of us who are interested in getting rid of non-human slavery rather than making it more humane.
If you're not vegan, become vegan. If you're vegan, but you're not an activist, become an activist, or be willing to be an activist. And if you're an activist and you're not an organizer, then become an organizer. That's the key to achieving animal liberation. We need active local groups, and we need people who will organize those groups. If you don't have the organizers, you won't have the groups. You really won't.
As we conclude this short film, I can only hope we are reminded of our roots as an abolitionist rights-based movement that was founded at a time where all around was violence, suppression, injustice and despair, and yet they still chose peace. Veganism has never been about settling for or compromising with oppression. We have always sought to challenge the exploitation of others for any purposes and have always advocated for their liberation. Throughout history, passionate individuals have dedicated their lives to demanding for rights to be acknowledged and for borderless social justice. They have written books, given speeches, organised protests, events, films, and fought tirelessly to raise awareness about the inherent value and rights of all sentient life. Their dedication and unwavering commitment to the abolitionist approach have paved the way for the progress that we do actually see today. As vegans, we have a responsibility to be self-aware of where we apply our time, energy, and vitally our money. We cannot just promote veganism, but we must also embody it in all aspects of our lives, and that includes the way we speak about it. If you yourself wouldn't be satisfied with having the cruelty removed and yet remaining enslaved, then don't campaign for cruelty-free for them. Advocate for abolition. Let us be mindful of the messages we share, the information we spread around, and the way we talk about the vegan message. Our words and actions have the power to inspire change, to raise awareness, and probably most importantly, it is our message, which is repeated by those not yet vegan, by those in the press, in the media, in government, in all the places we wish to ripen up and influence change. Let us continue to work on ourselves just as much as we do on anyone else. Let's make sure we both honour and evolve the original philosophy, and together we can make a difference and be a force for positive change. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Let us continue to spread the message of justice, peace and liberation for all, and strive for a future based on respecting animal rights, not polishing up human wrongs.
What history teaches us is that a few good people who are determined and who are persistent, who don't give up, can change the world. So what we have to believe as activists is that we're not going to do this tomorrow. The wall of oppression has to be taken apart a brick at a time. When we get a critical mass of people, change will occur. That's how I go to sleep at night. That's how I get up the next morning.
Well,
Thank you.
Andy, you've done a fantastic job. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you.
And
well, thank you. I was to say it. Thank you for all your help and support, and it wouldn't have happened without you. So appreciate it.
Well, I'm tempted to use that line out of Pulp Fiction, but I better not because it's 18 related.
We'll put that on your Wikipedia.
In terms of yeah, wow, indeed. So yes, Wendy, and your contribution was pretty wow.
But yeah, I mean, it's a shame that I could only use 11, 12 seconds of that speech, but it's brilliant.
Right. So now in terms of the questions that I want to ask you, there was a sequence there which you probably wouldn't expect in a vegan animal rights film. And I was thinking about the war footage, right? One of our previewers was really moved by that. And so you kind of explain why it's there, but do you want to say a bit more? Because it...
Yeah, sure. So a bit, I suppose it falls into the category of like things that I thought that I knew, that I clearly didn't, or knew the information, shall we say, but that actual fact and what it actually means didn't really resonate until looking at this. So like when you actually take that into consideration, that everywhere around was potentially the worst. I mean, most of us have never experienced anything like what they were going through, and hopefully never will. And yet they still sought justice and peace and liberation. And it's like when you actually think about it from that sense, the idea of veganism being a diet or a trend or a fad or any of these things, it's not just stupid anymore. It's offensive, because the philosophy was always about seeking the absolute opposite to all these atrocities that they were seeing all around them, and making that comparison as how, I mean, look at it. Everything was going wrong for the most part for humans. I mean, and they still considered others. They still took non-humans into consideration. It was kind of that we want the opposite of this. What's the opposite of this? Peace. It's not diet. It's not trend. It's not, it's none of those things. It was a solution, and I think that's been forgotten.
Yeah, well, I always talk sociologically about people being products of their time, and I think it's easy for us to look back at the war. It's history for us. It's Hollywood. It's films. Whereas they were learning about concentration camps right there and then on their radio and all that, and it must have been a real shock. I know Watson was very kind of upset by what happened at Dresden, for example, kind of carpet bombing and all that. He almost died himself. As you say in the film, he actually lost some friends. So yeah, very kind of powerful stuff. In terms of the actual quality of the film, I mean, you're obviously bringing in lots and lots of sources from, some archive stuff, and you've done some kind of restoration work. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the two main examples that you'll see it on is one particular Reagan clip towards the end, and the Kathleen Genoway stuff. Anyone that's tried to watch that Kathleen speech on here before, I mean, it's a great speech, but it's just such a shame that it looks like it was recorded by, I don't know, some infant. No offense, but like the camera's all over the place the entire way through, and the audio's terrible. So at least now I have managed to clean up that entire speech. And obviously I've only used a very brief segment of it in the film, so I think that's something that me and you potentially will upload, or certainly I will, and people can watch that again in a much better. I mean, there's not too much improvement in terms of the visuals, but the audio is massively improved. You could turn that into a podcast now and it's listenable. It's not going to blow your headphones up, so to speak. And I'm more than happy to do that kind of thing going forward. I mean, one of the things that I did notice when I was doing this research is a lot of this footage now, it exists, well, a lot of it is on your YouTube channel or one or two other places, and it doesn't exist anywhere else. So it's not necessarily just about enhancing it because obviously it sounds and looks better, but it's about keeping that historic record alive, because in 10 years' time, there might not be internet archive footage of Reagan anymore. And I
know what you're saying, Andy. We've got to act quickly because I haven't got long left.
I don't know, but what I'm saying is, just say, for example, like we talked earlier about like copyright strikes. Imagine you got 3 in a week. That's the end of your YouTube. Like, seriously. So like, unless this is backed up somewhere else by other people, we're going to lose this stuff. And there was stuff, I mean, look at how difficult it was to find the 89 debate, and like how, little things like this that we feel are lost to time. I'd hate for that to happen, especially with such historic, important speeches and things like that. It would just be such a shame. So it's as much keeping the record alive as it is about enhancing it and making it better.
Yeah, well, I couldn't believe it when you showed me that 89 stuff, because I thought it was lost for about, I don't know, 20, 29, 30 years or something. So
that's exactly it. And now potentially it's on your channel. I've got it unlisted just in case anything ever happens. So there's 2 more places that it's safe. And like, people are probably going to be put off re-uploading that Kathleen clip because it's so terrible quality, but it's improved. That might encourage someone else to upload it, which is another record. So it's more about just keeping all of this information alive so other people can go and watch it. And I think that kind of covers potentially, something that I'd want to address as well. I know that quite a lot of the things that flash up on the screen are fast paced. That was always the idea. It's not like I watched it back and thought, yeah, you should be able to read that slide in 3 seconds. I'm quite aware that that's not the case. I don't really want, if you want to pause the film and read things, feel free, obviously. But most of it are snippets, they're clips, they're cropped bits. So the actual encouragement is for you, like, go and read Leslie Cross's essays, go and read this document, go and read that cover point article that Reagan and Francione did together. Go and read these things for yourself. You could look at it in exactly the same way that, take Francione's speech or Steve Best's speech. They're well over an hour, and I've only taken 2-3 minutes. So it's the same with the document. I'm giving you a brief sample because I don't want you to just take this information and that's it. Go and do this research for yourself and realize that when you actually look at it, half the questions we get asked today, you can laugh at them when you actually know what the philosophy is and what it was based on, because they're just pathetic in comparison. But it also means that we know what we're saying, what we're talking about. We're not campaigning against cruelty. We never have been. I know that potentially that word's been used before, but it had a totally different meaning 80 years ago. We weren't talking about cruelty, i.e. take this cage and make it bigger. Those things didn't exist then. So, I'm pretty sure if they were around now, they would be against the word for exactly the same reason we are.
Yeah, the Kathleen Janaway thing is vastly improved, and because I think even the camera person was kind of catching the back of somebody else, and
there's a few times where like they drop the camera almost, and it's kind of like, there's not too much I can do about that. But in terms of the audio, at the very least, like their shakiness, their hand movements, quite a lot of that has been reduced, and her voice is enhanced. So
I had a talk that I did in Paris, filmed once, and the person filming fell asleep, and so, and so the camera, just
oh no, what is it? Is it the floor at the end?
and so one amusing thing, I don't know whether people in the audience got this, is where Kathleen Janaway goes, the age of predatory man and woman. I don't know whether people saw that. That's quite neat.
That sounds better in the more enhanced version. It's much clearer. That's one of the, because I suppose it shows a sign of the times as well, doesn't it? That that's how it always used to be. The history of man, or the origin of man. That was kind of, that was just the term. So yeah,
that's right.
It's a humorous correction.
Now here's my most difficult question for you, because I want to first of all congratulate you about the gender balance. You've done really well in finding many voices of women for this. And of course, we know that even though our movement is populated by women, finding footage of women is quite a task compared. But some people are going to say it's very white.
Yeah. I'm sure they will. And there's no argument there for me. It is. But I can only kind of deal with the cards that I'm dealt, so to speak. I can only use what's available to me. So if that potentially is something that people are thinking about, let's make another film about rights-based activists in this decade right now. Send me to them, and let's change that. The one thing I would like to do going forward is, there's obviously lots of people that are already talking about this stuff, and that I don't pretend to know or claim to know, obviously, that are all over the place. Let's make another film that showcases the people that are already doing this, as opposed to just the ones from the past. So this is a perfect opportunity to correct that going forward. Because there's not too much I can do when we're talking about like archive footage and things like this. I can only work with what exists. And that's a sad state of affairs, isn't it?
It's the kind of hand you are dealt. My last question you've kind of answered already, because I was talking about kind of stylistic elements of it, and some of the previewers said that the text was moving too quick, and I wondered whether you designed it in the sense that you could watch it through and then watch it again and pause, but you're really saying that you prefer people to go to the
with some of the bits, obviously you most certainly could do that, or you could just pause it and you'd read the bulk of what is on the screen. However, yeah, the idea, I mean, if anyone's ever watched any of the videos that I make for my poems and things like that, everything is always fast paced. It is, because I don't want you to read this. If this is the problem that we have, people read a sentence from an essay and don't read the rest. And this is why we have people that only know a tiny piece of the information instead of the big picture. So I want you to go and see that for yourself. And it's exactly the same with the clips of the thing. I don't want you to just watch 1 minute of this clip. Go and watch the speech. Go and listen to it, like in its entirety. So you've got the context, you've got everything. That's what I encourage people to do. I don't want them to get a 1 second snippet from my poem or from my video. I want them to actually go and check that for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, I suppose the best way of looking at it from a stylistic point of view, I'll give you enough to make you want to hopefully go and read the rest. If you're interested enough that you're like, oh, I can't read this, go find it. It's there.
Yeah, and you will help if they can't find it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, somebody's asking what your YouTube channel is.
It's not your mum, not your milk, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and
yeah.
It needs subscribers, people. So
yeah, I'm not a big. I've never been big on my YouTube, so it's only got about 45 subs or whatever. But yeah,
I think it might be in the 60s now. I'm not
oh,
sure.
Okay.
The last from me, you sent me a couple of screenshots, and I was quite shocked by it. Well, not really, but that kind of, I should be, but I wasn't. You're one of those. And you used it in the film, and you went to the PETA website and you put in a search for Tom Reagan and for Peter Singer, right? Tom Reagan, the animal rightist, and Peter Singer, who, as we see in the film, is not an animal rights advocate. And you get one result for Tom Reagan, and 117 for Peter Singer, right? And it just seems to me so bizarre that we've almost got a boycott of animal rights within the animal rights movement.
It seems that way, doesn't it? Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, the one thing that I'll say in Peter Singer's defense over Peter, the group's defense, is that at least he's honest about his position. I mean, as you can see in the film, he doesn't claim to be something that he's not. It's this label that he's given. But can you imagine if that extended somewhere else? We've got the father of peace who says, well, I'm not actually opposed to war as long as it's done in the right way. We wouldn't use that expression. I mean, Martin Luther King, for example, if he was against justice, he wouldn't be. No, we don't use these examples in the same way. So I don't understand how we can call him the father of animal rights when he doesn't believe in it or agree with it. It just seems really, really silly. And the fact that he'll actually try and justify why actually the use of animals is okay in certain ways makes it even more absurd. I mean, if there was no other text, if Peter Singer was the only person that ever written a book about this subject, it would still be wrong. The fact that there's way better books already that are boycotted is, well, disgraceful, to be perfectly honest. If you are listening to this and you donate money to Peter every month, that's enough of a reason alone to cancel you, as far as I'm concerned. That alone, the fact that they are actively promoting someone who thinks that using animals is okay and essentially silence someone who says the opposite. I think that's something as an organization we shouldn't ignore.
Yeah, this bit is actually it's not that, in the sense that he starts the book with a bit of an apology, but he also starts the book talking about human liberation, women's liberation, and women's rights, and a review came out in the early years, something about 76, saying, "Oh, you didn't talk about this right, you didn't talk about that right, and everything." And he responded to the review quite bitterly by saying, "Well, I didn't put the rights in there because it's not a rights-based book, and I regret even using the word now because it's kind of caused confusion."
Yeah,
you know, and so he used to argue bitterly about that, but nothing much he could do, I suppose. So it wasn't that the liberation bit was the problem; it's the fact that he used the word rights that he regretted doing, in a sense. One hopes that the film will be discussed thoroughly within the welfare camps. We can hope.
Yeah, I hope it's discussed all over the place, to be perfectly honest. You know, even if it's just to challenge it or to criticize it, I just hope it invokes some conversation. That's the idea.
I'm just going back in the chat a little bit here just to see. I don't think I've missed anything. So if you want to ask a direct question right now, then type it in, and That one there is make sure this. That's right. This is what you were saying before, wasn't it? Really. Yeah. So it needs to be all over the kind of place.
Yeah, and that's not just in talking about the videos too. I mean, there's a selected amount of places that you can find this documentation online too. So I would encourage everyone. I mean, the vast majority of, in fact, I think all of Leslie Cross's essays are available in a PDF. We're talking about 10 megabytes worth of data. Go and download them, keep them up just in case. It's well worth keeping this stuff.
There's HTML, isn't it? And PDF.
Yeah, that's right.
Of all of them. Yeah.
All of this kind of stuff, honestly, for the sake of what, £4 or £5 for a USB stick, I would just back this information up, because essentially it's our job now to keep this history. No one else is going to do it.
We're handing the baton on. Thanks also to Grumpy for this little tip, which is quite interesting. So
I can't like it myself, as I would.
Yeah, that would be a bit cheeky, I suppose. But no,
it would be a bit narcissistic of me.
Right. Is there anything that we're missing here? I think we've got it all. I think. Right. Well, so don't be lazy. What are you doing next?
Don't know. What are we doing next?
Okay.
Yeah. Teamwork now.
Yes.
But no, in all honesty, going back to what I talked about, sort of, i.e., different people. I know that there are other people that are talking about this stuff. I'm not trying to pretend they're not. I'm not trying to make out that there isn't anyone else doing this except a handful. That's not the case. But obviously, I'm not aware of these people. We're not all in the same circles all the time. But I would love to see these people. Please send me an email or a message. Send me their YouTube link, and let's make another film that shows, in terms of motivation wise, that this is being done. It's not just the case of the people that said it in the past and now it's all been forgotten. There are more people than I thought. In fact, no, I'd love to do that kind of follow up if that's how people feel. Send me these people, the kind of people I'd like to subscribe to and follow.
The real problem really is something that we've talked about privately. Really, is the corporate structure of the movement. I know. Yeah,
I just read that comment.
Caroline, you're off the birthday card list now. I'll tell you that. Okay. You've already done that, haven't you?
Twice. Yes, twice. I think you have to pay to meet me anyway. You need to send a super chat.
Oh, there's a question. Who would you say are the top abolitionist activists out there right now?
There's a couple that are featured in the film. There's people that are in our little circles. This is what I mean. I only really know people that I communicate with. In terms of big names, I don't want to be rude, but
what do you think?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know. Show me one.
Well, in terms of big names, there seems to be a shift with Joey, doesn't there?
Yes. Yeah. Most recently, yes, in some of the language and stuff like that. Although he still seems to be a denier that animals have rights, I suppose, in the sense that if he's trying to achieve them getting rights, then it's the same end goal.
Yeah, he did say in a recent one that other animals don't have rights, which is obviously a misreading of the theory a little bit. But I mean, considering that he's probably fairly new to it compared with all the welfare socialization that he's had over 7 years. I mean, I think he's 8 to 9 years in now, right? And so there you go. So
it might even be 10. Yeah. So in response to Colleen, I mean, I think the easiest way of doing it is we all can. We can all get it right. If you literally put a little bit of time in it, information to yourself about essentially what's in the film and more, you'll already come to that conclusion and you'll just act that way naturally. I don't necessarily think that we should be looking it up to other people to say who's doing this right so I can replicate them. If you go and seek this information and take it on board, you'll come to that conclusion by yourself, and you can do that yourself. Because at the end of the day, I mean, there's a perfect slide in the film that sums this up. We can't rely on certain, even if there's 50 brilliant big name abolitionist activists, we still need to do our bit too. Can't just rely on them. They're not going to solve this by themselves. So I wouldn't want to point to anyone, even if there was people. I would still encourage you to go and be one yourself. And the best way to do that is to just look back and realize that that's potentially what we should always have been doing.
Right, Andy, I know you're a slow speaker, but you'll have to try and answer this one quick, because Graham's only got 2% battery left, so you haven't got a lead to plug in now. How can we support you to do more activism and to keep you being a critical voice for animal rights? Yeah, we've talked about a couple of things, but what would you say, Andy?
Well, I never like talking about this kind of thing, but I do have a Patreon if anyone wants to sort of contribute in any way, shape, or form. One of the things, long time, I hate this kind of thing, like I said, but my laptop is probably on its last legs if I was going to continue to do this kind of thing, especially like, I mean, we talked before off air about the sort of justice speech. That'd be one that I'd love to spend the time in cleaning up, but at the moment my tech isn't good enough to do that. But I would like to going forward. It's stuff that I'd more than be happy to invest the time into. But at the moment, I haven't got that capability. But I don't like taking anything off anyone without doing something in return. So, yeah, like I would be at your beck and call, so to speak. There, you know, my Patreon people kind of can tell me what to do, and I'd do it. That's sort of how like, you know, I feel like they are my employees, so to speak, employers. Sorry, in that sense.
Do you think Carolyn's got her credibility back? Always for Animal Rights, which actually is a brilliant podcast. Yeah. And you can hear my interviews with Roger, Wendy, Lee Hall, Gary Francione, and many others. Well, you'll be on there next.
Well, I'd happily do anything like that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think we're probably. There was something I was going to say, and I've forgotten what it was now, but can't have been that important, I suppose. It might have been. Yeah, like we were talking about see, that's another thing, you see, the reason that oh yeah, it was the language point you made, and you talked about cruelty, and you talked about we tend not to talk about rights violations, this kind of thing, and of course a lot of activists are going to push back and go, well, there's reasons for that, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they often say, well, we need to speak a language that people understand, which would be answered really by Donald Watson and Ripening Up. But how would you answer the people who would say, what's the point of talking to them in a foreign language, as it were?
Well, I suppose, and I understand the point. I do. I understand that in most people, if we're talking about the general public, if you say it's a rights violation to do this versus it's cruel to do this, then most people are going to, you know, they're going to sort of have some resonance with the cruelty over the rights violation. I get that. But imagine if we were talking about a human right, so to speak. No one would say, I'm not racist because it offends someone or because it's a bit mean to them. No one would use this language, would they? That would sound foreign. So why are we diluting it just because the species is different? Like, we wouldn't do this. It would be offensive, wouldn't it? If you were to say, I'm not against this ism because it's mean, as opposed to the fact that it's wrong, we'd criticize that language. I don't see a difference personally.
Yeah. Also, people say things like we should meet people where they are, but our job is to get them somewhere else.
Exactly that. Where people are at the moment is, for the most part, ignorant to the amount of exploitation they contribute to. So meeting them where they are isn't really pulling them away from that. You might kind for a lot of time, and you know, I don't mind saying it, you make them feel more comfortable about where they are, especially when you say, you know, we're against cruelty, and people go, well, I've been to the farm where I buy this from, and it's fine. You've took cruelty out of the equation all of a sudden now.
Everybody's they feel more comfortable. To the farm, haven't they?
yeah, and all of a sudden in this person's mind now, because the cruelty element has been taken away, they feel more comfortable about what they're doing. In exactly the same way it does with all of these like single issue campaigns and welfare. It only ever makes them feel more comfortable about doing it. We move further away actually from abolition, you know, and I hope people have picked that up. Like these things don't necessarily ever get to you to where you want. If you want to look at the history, they actually take you further away from it because you've got a bigger wall to climb next time you challenge it, because people are now comfortable with where you've put them, and they can quite often turn around and go, but you said that wasn't right, so we changed it and now you're not happy. They've got this kind of leverage over you that you've given them when it was fundamentally wrong from the get-go, and you just didn't point it out.
Yeah, I always say that no words are banned. So if people want to talk to you about cruelty, you can. It's a question then moving on. And I
Yeah,
think
backing it up, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Graham is right here, because I've done this on the street loads of times, and people understand what rights are, and they understand what rights violations are. You could even use words like rights abuses. Some of the human rights groups have switched, which is interesting linguistically. They've switched from saying rights violations to human rights abuses. I don't know whether that's because people understand that word a bit more, but I did notice that in literature has kind of happened. Well, I don't mind that too much.
No, at least the focus is still on the rights. It's not ignoring that part.
Yeah, there's a word. Well, I always appreciated that bit in the Wendy speech which you highlighted, which is we're not begging for mercy, because as everybody knows me, knows that is the weakest word ever in terms,
Well, yeah. I mean, let's look at it in that sense. Let's take a petition that asks to reduce suffering. That is literally begging for mercy. Because a petition, at the end of the day, whether we want to admit it or not, is always begging. It's begging the government or whoever. You're begging them to change. You're not saying you better change this or we're going to do this. You're saying please change it. So you're begging. So yeah, you're begging for mercy if you make a petition about reducing suffering. And when you actually put it in those terms, it sounds really silly, don't it? So why are we doing it?
Yeah, and please don't be cruel. But I mean, the lucky thing about the mercy thing is at least no one would be daft enough to call a campaigning group with that word. So at least we've got that at least. So so that's good. Colleen said Ronnie talked about people coming through gates where you greet them and then move them on in the right direction. Yeah, I mean it's like that, isn't it? You somebody comes to your house, you don't leave them at the door, so you take them somewhere else. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's yeah. Again, you see, the thing is, I think people who object to rights-based language actually exaggerate the problem with it, because I don't think that people really have these issues. Shame really that Jeremy Hess is not here, because Jeremy the Ape has done quite a lot of rights-based advocacy on the street, and I think a mixed bag of results. And of course you do get that, and of course it becomes a bit of a skill that you can move people on to talking, and you just have to say that. Well, of course, the a lot of people do talk about cruelty, as you've just done. There's a more fundamental position which is based on animal rights, and as soon as you said that, it gives you the opportunity to explain what it is. Then
exactly,
yeah. So it's not really a problem, really.
And I mean, it's a much stronger case. So
yeah, this is difficult, really, from a North American point of view, because North America's always had a bit of problem with children's rights, for example. So even human rights has been a bit of a problem for, Europeans have taken to rights better than North Americans. That's what I'm kind of saying, really. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, it'd be, I don't know. I mean, where's that going to go if people? Yeah, that's also true. Jeremy now back in the USA. We deported him. That's what it was. So all the animal rights show people deported him.
Sorry, I've just set that video to public because I forgot. I've just done it.
All right. So yeah, great. So the public. So if you want to watch the video again, it's now public on notyourmum.notyourmilk. In fact, when you put that in, I think it comes up a few times. I think there's quite a few.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I noticed.
Well,
that.
mine has definitely got a full stop in between, so it's not your mum.
Right.
And mum is spelled M-U-M, not M-O.
Yeah, not mom.
Not mom.
Certainly not ma.
No, not ma.
So, Andy, do you want to say your final words, and then we shall bid everyone adieu and thank them for watching?
Yeah, just thank you all for being here. I'm quite thick-skinned. Been vegan quite a long time. So any criticism, especially constructive, anyone that wants to suggest something going forward or anything like that, please get in touch. I'm really easy to contact. I'm very approachable. And yeah, thank you for being here. I hope that it does something somewhere. You know, if it only makes very, very, very tiny changes within a few people, then it was worth making.
Yeah, well said. And again, well done in regard to the film. It's absolutely fantastic. I think everybody loved it. I haven't read The Case for Animal Rights, but isn't the premise that if humans have rights? Well, this is really interesting, right? Peter Singer said that. He said, well, if humans have rights, then surely other animals have rights too. Of course, the point that people didn't realize is that he said if, because he doesn't think that humans
have rights.
Yeah, have rights either. So yeah, I mean, he'll talk about legal rights and everything. So yeah, that's an interesting one. And another thing to say there is that yes, it is an extensionist idea, but more modest. So we talk about negative rights. So in other words, in terms of, if you want to put it this way, other animals would have fewer rights than humans, because they wouldn't have the ones that are relevant just to humans, the positive rights, you know. So as Reagan always says, you know, we're not talking about ballet lessons for pigs and, you know, the right to education for cows and this kind of stuff. Right. I'll echo this. Well done, Andy. Such an amazing contribution to the cause, which will benefit immensely, I'm sure. So people, thank you so much for watching. Sadly, I don't have a flashy end thing. So
if it's possible, just play the last 10 seconds of the video again. That little clip by Reagan always fills me with just like sunshine.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Let me just see.
Because it's just perfect.
Continue to spread the message of just.
Well, I can do it from there, I think. So let me see if I can get us back. Hang on, let me get rid of the comment a little bit. Sorry, Colleen, about that.
Justice, peace, and liberation for all, and strive for a future based on respecting animal rights, not polishing up human wrongs.
What history teaches us is that a few good people who are determined and who are persistent, who don't give up, can change the world. So what we have to believe as activists is that we're not going to do this tomorrow. The wall of oppression has to be taken apart a brick at a time. When we get a critical mass of people, change will occur. That's how I go to sleep at night. That's how I get up the next morning.
A great man, much missed. So people, live long and prosper. We'll see you around.